If the first experience for me was one of love and acceptance, then the second one was a harsh lesson in greed and humility. A violent feeling and kind of discomforting experience cast in the darkness of a cold floor. One that I had just spent not only a month ago having very vivid and loving revelations about myself. And while I laid there, sweating and puking, often rather violently, and grasping onto whatever strands of reality I could to hold them for dear life while the world around me melted, all I wanted was for all of it to just end. After my last experience of being one of self-love and kind of just revelations about aspects of myself that I struggled with and was able to accept, I felt really good. I often thought about the things that I had learned about myself and started recognizing things in myself that I would do to sort of self-censor, whether it be the way I move, which is often kind of twitchy and regularly, or the way I speak, or the way I carry myself. There was so much I was still learning, and to this day, years later, am still learning to be my authentic self. But at that point, with only a single experience under my belt, I kind of felt like I'd sort of found a cheat code to my own mental health. There was a desire, a deep one, for me to immediately go back, which I didn't. I gave myself a little over a month and wanted to go further, go deeper. And so I got cocky, kind of arrogant about it in a weird way, not in a I'm better than you way, but I thought I really found something kind of way. And I thought to myself, if 1.5 grams was that healing and helpful, what if I really blasted off? And so I decided not to double my dose, but nearly 4 times it and take a little over 4 grams. Before moving on from this point, I think it's important for you to understand why I even started doing them in the first place, why I even dipped my toes in that very first time. And all that research and everything I'd done was out of an anxiety and a fear of not knowing what it would be like to let go of my self-control, to let go of my mind. But at the end of the day, the point was to try something that looked fun. Up until this point in my life, other than, the occasional social drink, I'd been maybe drunk 4 times in my life total, I had only really played with the funny grass, them little funny jazz cigarettes. And I only touched those when I turned 30. Very scared of a lot of things. So when that first experience I had didn't provide me the fun giggles, at least not for the entirety of the time, but instead provided me an inward look at who I was and an exploration of my own trauma and my own self over the course of 5 hours, my interest in mushrooms took a hard right turn. And while I did experience that silliness many times in future experiences to come, at the core of it all now, after just one trip, there was something else I was chasing. A curiosity as to what these things could do and what I could explore to myself was. And I'd say that context is important because to go from 1.5 to 4, when the point for me even going into this in the first place was just to have those silly experiences, is a jump that no one would ever recommend. And I certainly am one that would absolutely tell you do not ever, ever, ever jump that high after just one experience. Moreover, as I began and started taking this next huge dose, my intention was really not clear. The first time the intention was to have fun, and through that intention, I learned that I couldn't really enjoy it until I didn't hate myself. But this second time, there wasn't an intention for fun. There wasn't really an intention for healing, so to speak. There was just an intention that if I did X amount, I should have X level profound experience. And something that I can say now, after doing it as long as I have, which is still not all that long, mind you, is that mushrooms, for whatever reason, while they may take your intention into account, and they often do, are more willing to show you things you need to see first before any intention can be explored fully. The set and the setting remain the same. The safety of my home at the time, and of course, the comfort and surroundings of my pets and familiar atmosphere. But this time, the come up wasn't gentle. There was no hour or two of fun silliness. This time, the come up was violent and anxiety inducing. I do remember as it all started to happen, the house did get some of that Alice in Wonderland-ish looking vibes. The thing started looking out of scale again, and that part was fun, but I genuinely mean it when it lasted mere minutes. Soon, the thoughts to myself of, am I ruining the night to myself? Am I ruining the night for those who are around me and watching me? Am I worrying too much about what's gonna happen? Oh, my body feels really different. This isn't weird. Oh, all of a sudden I feel really nauseous. The thoughts, the negative thoughts, a spiral of them began. Now, they weren't like super depressing bad thoughts or anything. It was just an anxiety storm, swirling thoughts in my head that ran at a train speed on a track that was being dragged further and further underground, all being pushed by a drug that I was not very familiar with at the time. And as I was approaching this larger dose, I was beginning to feel and see things in my body and outside them that I had never experienced before because I've never done a dose this big before. It's all common sense now. But that's also kind of me in a nutshell. I typically jump into things for better or worse full force if I like them. I super absorb information about them and I can learn things that I like really quickly. And I sort of treated this the same way. Very soon after the visuals began, the discomfort set in. Nausea started and would not stop until the trip would be done 5 or 6 hours later. Something I actually didn't really learn until later is the nausea is quite often induced to the mushroom itself. On the second trip, I was eating them again. And when the mushroom hits your stomach, especially if you're doing a high dose, your stomach has a hard time digesting the chitinous exofibers of the mushroom itself. And that is what starts making you nauseous. And if you do it on a stomach with some food or even an empty stomach, you're likely going to feel nauseous unless you have a more high tolerance for that kind of thing, which I do not. I loathe puking. Nausea is like one of my top 3 worst feelings in the world that I try to avoid at all costs. There was no avoiding it this time. Then I started feeling really sweaty and the night got quite late. I let my girlfriend know I was gonna be okay. I wasn't okay, and I let her go to bed. When she did go to bed, I finally went to the bathroom, closed the door, sat on the floor, and started to puke. The lights felt like they made me nauseous. Looking at my phone made me nauseous. And even looking at my phone, when I did look at my phone to try and communicate with anybody, the icons on the screen were moving around. I would reach out to press on an icon to text message or send my family a message or whoever, and I would swear to you I was tapping on it and nothing was happening because they were moving. The light itself felt like it made me nauseous, and eventually I decided the light needed to get turned off. And that's where the visuals got kind of rough. Now, during this, there was no inner voice of mine. There were no deep insights. There was no grand recollection or divination or revelation of things about myself that I needed to fix, at least not immediately. No, the only thing I could ever think was, when is this going to end? Please, God, let this thing end. Time dragged on. Sometimes the hour felt like eternity. Sometimes minutes felt like hours. There was no point in time where this felt like it was happening fast in any way. What's worse, when I turned off the lights and I laid back down on that cold bathroom floor, that cool tile helped ease the nausea at least a little bit. Anytime I looked at my legs, I would watch them melt into the floor. And I would blink a couple times and shake my head, and I would then look and they would be there. But as soon as I looked, they would begin to melt into the floor. All the while, I am sweating badly. I begin to strip my clothes and I begin to start wondering, oh God, is this ever gonna end? Here's the thing, logically, even then, in my own mind, I knew what I was doing. I knew I was tripping, I knew I was having a bad time, and I logically knew that this was going to end. But the anxious thought of, is this ever gonna end, didn't ever let go. But it wasn't ending. And when I looked at the phone, it was past midnight. My girlfriend was asleep and I did not want to bother her. And I thought of all the people I could call and contact. I believe I tried to call my sister, but she has kids and she was asleep. My brother was out. I think I texted him, somehow managed to. And I knew my mom would be asleep and I wouldn't want to bother her when she was sleeping because I know she also has, kind of a tight sleep schedule. But my dad, while I know he has a kind of regular sleep schedule, I also know he in his youth dabbled with this stuff. And all I needed in that moment, if it wasn't going to end, was reassurance. So the next picture I'm going to paint for you is one of the lowest that I felt on mushrooms in any way. He answered the phone, thankfully, and when he answered, and I can remember saying, "What's up, buddy? It's late." I told him I was tripping on mushrooms, I was having a very bad time, and I needed to know if it was going to end. And to his credit, and I am grateful for him, he immediately snapped into dad mode and was like, "It's going to end. Don't worry, buddy. You're somewhere comfortable. Do you have water next to you? Are you okay?" You know, I would puke with him intermittently on the phone, and he would ask if like everything is good, and he would go quiet and, you know, just wait, and he would be on the phone with me for a couple of hours. And I remember at one point the nausea was at least gotten to manageable. The puking had stopped, I was still ass naked, and my dad was on the phone with me still, not FaceTime thankfully. And so I got up, I left the bathroom, and the house didn't look to scale still, but I began to pace all the way to the kitchen, to the living room, and back and forth, sweating, naked, holding my dad on speakerphone while keeping my phone at my side, and just pacing back and forth. I would constantly say to him, "Oh my God, is this gonna end, Dad? Is this ever gonna end?" And with the patience in his voice, he'd say, "Yes, buddy, it's gonna end, I promise." Mind you, I'm 37 at the time this is happening. And for another hour, that's what I did. And that's the other part with mushrooms. There is no grand end to the mushrooms in any way. Suddenly, the feeling of nausea kind of just faded. The house looked normal. It's not like it snapped back. At just one point, you realize things kind of look normal. And as I sat down and the sweating finally stopped, my dad was gratefully allowed to be let go. And I am incredibly grateful for him being on the phone with me that night, because I was having bad anxiety. And then when the come down finally happened, I didn't feel an afterglow. I didn't feel a fun high. I felt defeated, exhausted, done with this experience. And weirdly, I sort of felt humiliated by the whole thing, and my assumption that I knew what I was doing, and my assumption that I knew that this was going to turn out in a grand revelation of some way just because I upped the dose. And honestly, I was a little afraid. I didn't understand why it had gone so poorly this time. I did everything by the book as I had read over and over again, and I wasn't going in with negative thoughts or mindset. I was genuinely excited for this trip. And that feeling of anxiety ended up winning for a while. This experience put me off mushrooms for over a year. I, after that, really didn't think I would touch them again. I was not okay with how off the rails that trip went. Not okay with 4 hours of straight nausea. Not okay being a 37-year-old man sweating naked, walking through his house with his dad on the phone on speakerphone. None of what that was what I signed up for. But that was where the lesson was to be learned. At least one of them. And maybe one of the most important lessons that I could ever put across on this channel. Respect the substance. They are a powerful tool, one that has seemingly, in a metaphorical way, a will of its own. And your mind is one that you don't really truly know, and one that takes time to explore. It's powerful, it's therapeutic, it's a tool. And I treated it like a blunt force object, a toy to be played with. It wasn't the trip I wanted, but in the most cliche way possible, it was the trip I needed. I learned that more isn't better, that you can triple the dose and not have anywhere near the experience you would have on a smaller one. And in my time, and we'll get to it, I've had more encounters with that high of a dose when prepared, and I've had less experience on it than I have had in smaller ones. There is no dose response curve for these things. There's no way that we can scientifically measure exactly how it's going to work with every attempt you take. Doubling the dose does not equal doubling the effects. And for the longest time, for the majority of that year plus that I spent between the second and what would be the third trip, I had considered the second trip, by all accounts, a failure, but it was the most important failure of my entire journey so far. What this trip taught me as I spent a year plus integrating and thinking about it, and I thought about it a lot in that time, was that it wasn't a failure by any stretch. It had taught me something very important about respect and humility, things that I had to learn before I would be able to continue and experience them in the way that I have experienced them now. And looking back, if I was to compare that trip to my life in a metaphorical way, Sometimes it's in that darkness, when you are at complete rock bottom, that you find who you truly are and realize how much more you can grow and learn. And for me, learning that humility is something I will never, ever let go of. The more I've explored, the more I've learned, the more I realize how much I don't know. And it's that curiosity about how much I don't know that drives me to continue to explore, to see these things or experience these things in this one game of life I get to play. This trip was not a failure by any accounts, and was equally important as the first one in wildly different ways. And while the anxiety won out for over a year, it wouldn't win forever. There's a call that I cannot seem to ignore when it comes to the curiosity of my mind, of consciousness, of psychedelics in general, and altered states. A fascination with the chemical reaction and the spiritual interaction, and how it seems to help metaphorical thinking minds crack deeper into their own psyche. And yes, while it would be a long time before I would return to them a third time, and while the motivations would remain similar, there was a lot of different reasons I had finally decided to return. And while I did more preparation when I came to that point of being ready to do them again, things would still be very, very different. And I don't think I could have ever been ready for how weird things were just about to get. I'll see you next time.